Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Charlotte Dennett, and Charlotte has written books about the oil pipelines. And show the cover of your book if you
Okay,
have it.
just a second. I've got to find it. Oh, here it
It's
is. Hold
right
on.
there.
There it is.
Good. And
Yeah.
Charlotte and I are going to talk about Gaza. So, what do you think?
What do I think? Where to begin, right? I just read a beautiful letter to Trump from a Palestinian, uh, and it was so beautifully put. It was just saying, you don't know our history. We're very attached to this land, and you're not going to push us out. We're not going to let you do it. And the fact is, I think the entire Arab world is not going to allow it because they have to worry. The leaders have to worry about the Arab street. They can't go too far. This whole idea of Trump coming in and he says he's going to own it. I mean, everyone's aghast, really.
Mhm.
We don't know. Of course, there is, you know, going after every single federal agency you can think of and start paring them down. It's a real power play, but it's based on ignorance, is the way I look at it. And anybody who has spent any time studying the Middle East, diplomats, politicians, writers, you know that you can't avoid the Palestinian issue. You just can't.
Mhm.
But having a Palestinian state now is all mostly rubble, you know, and Trump talks about a Riviera. I mean, he clearly envisions, beautiful waterfront property, as Jared Kushner calls it. But
Right.
there's one thing they're all missing, and the media is missing as it's the usual. It's the oil connection and the gas connection. No one's talking about it. It's
Mhm.
blowing my mind. Um, so I could
So,
elaborate if you
so,
want me to.
so I gave you the platform so you could talk about it.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Um, you know, ever since oil and natural gas was discovered, first of all, in 2000 off the coast of Gaza and Israel, and then in 2010 there was a much larger field. They've named it Leviathan. All total, the amount of oil and natural gas off the coast of Israel and Gaza and Lebanon and Syria is worth $500 billion. You know, so that changed everything. Golda Meir, who was once the premier of Israel, she once made a famous statement, and here it is. She made this in 1973. It took Moses 40 years to find the only place in the Middle East with no oil. That's where they landed the Jewish homeland. But the irony is now that it's swimming. It's swimming in it. There's so much off the coast, and then there's oil has been discovered in the West Bank. And so Israel's approach to this, the right wing under Netanyahu, is to grab it and push the Palestinians out, get rid of them, wipe them out. And I mean, where are these people living? I guess they're living in tents. It's so horrible. Everyone's so aghast, and the power plays by Trump and his ally Netanyahu is so insensitive. It boggles the mind. But one thing I learned in studying the oil and gas business um, is, as one person told me, they will stop at nothing. They don't care. They will destroy the environment. They will do regime change. They will cause wars. Everything to get control over the oil and natural gas. And part of it is, of course, they're making huge profits out of it. But there's another part which is seldom told, which is that oil is still the fuel of the military. Okay? The U.S. military is the largest consumer of oil, and but it's going on all around, and it's happening in Gaza. I can go into that later, but the point being, The right wing in Israel was determined to prevent the Palestinians from getting access to the oil and natural gas off its coast. It's called the Gaza Marine. And British Petroleum had come in 2000 to help the Palestinians develop it. And what happened next is there were two invasions of Gaza. Um, I'm trying to think 2009 and 2014. And both of those were designed to prevent the Gazans from exploiting their own oil and natural gas. You know, Arafat, the former leader, was saying, "Oh my God, we can finally develop our own resources." No, 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 no. Netanyahu does not want that to happen. So these two invasions, they did not achieve what he wanted. What he wanted is to create an energy corridor along the entire coast. And that would mean controlling Lebanon, if possible, and Syria. And you got, you know, the way you have to understand this region is you got to look at a map. I'm going to put my book up again simply to show how you need to focus on this geopolitical reality. You see, here is the map, and
Mm-hmm.
and you can see here's the Eastern Mediterranean. Here are pipelines connecting to it, which I can explain later. But
Mm-hmm.
so if you wait a minute, yeah, it's kind of this blocks it out. But if you look at the map, you will see all these countries are bordering on the Eastern Mediterranean. And when I was there as a reporter in the 1970s, people would call, for instance, Lebanon the gateway to the Middle East. But I would soon discover that it's more than that. It's the gateway to Middle East oil because the oil of Iraq um, would pass through and terminate on a pipeline, two different places, one in Lebanon and the other one in Haifa. Haifa, Palestine was it when it was built, okay? And then also the oil of Saudi Arabia. You know, that oil was transported to Lebanon. So you can see this is the Trans-Arabian Pipeline, which was projected to terminate in either Haifa or somewhere in Lebanon. And my father was the person who was working on it. He was America's first master spy in the Middle East. He was sent over there, and his last mission, he was there for 3 years. When he first went, part of his job, and he wrote this in a 5-page paper called Analysis of Work, and he said, "We must control the oil at all costs." And what I ended up discovering is that becomes like a meme that continues all the way up to the present. And again, part of it is the military use of the oil. Germany ran out of gas in World War I and World War II. Big lesson. You can't run out of gas, right? So there's all this mad scramble going on. It's going on right now. The Ukraine issue, by the way, is also about oil and natural gas, and it's all connected uh,
Mm-hmm.
be- because um, because in June of 22, there was the Europeans met and with Israel, and they did a memo of understanding, which was that Israel was going to ship oil and natural gas to Europe. And the reason for that is because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Then Europeans could no longer access the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was shut off by the Americans and the Germans. So Europe was starting to get desperate for energy. So Biden was running around looking for different places, and of course Saudi Arabia was one place to try to feed energy up to Europe. But the other place was Israel. So they signed this memorandum of understanding in June of 22. They're going to ship. And how do they do that? Preferably by pipeline. Okay. The problem is there was too much unrest in the area, and no bank is going to support a pipeline project when there's unrest. So, how do you deal with that unrest? Looks what happens. Destroy Hamas. And by the way, destroy Gaza along the way. And kill all the people. Who cares? And if you have to move them out, move them out. And so this solution, which is ethnic cleansing, is intolerable. I mean, even Western diplomats realize that is going too far, but it's already gone too far. So the big question is, I think, I think this whole idea of the U.S. going in there and controlling Gaza and owning it, well, sure, that's what Trump wants to do, and that's what Netanyahu, he's okay with that too, because then they can proceed with their energy corridor. But I don't see the Palestinians being displaced, frankly. I mean, there's so much history, and uh, Egypt doesn't want them, Jordan doesn't want them. What's to become of them? So,
Okay.
anyway, ask me a question. I'll ramble on.
That's fine. When Trump first talked about, making it kind of like a Riviera, what was
Yeah.
your first reaction?
It- well, it's typical. I mean, that's how he looks at things. Through a real estate perspective, in total ignorance. And I don't know who advises him on the Middle East and fills him in on some of the history. But
Maybe
I
it's
mean,
his
things have changed.
son-in-law.
What?
Maybe it's his son-in-law.
Oh yeah, well, definitely his son-in-law. What they want to do is continue the Abraham Accords, which drew in a few Arab countries, but not all. And so the reason why October 7th happened is that the Palestinians, the Hamas, they realized that something was afoot and that their interest to have their own sovereign state was going to be pushed aside. So this was the time they decided we're going to invade, and the results. One day we'll know the full story about that invasion and how, frankly, uh, the Israelis let it happen. Let's be real about that. I mean, this is the most heavily monitored place probably in the world,
Mm,
and you had women uh, surveilling the fence and reporting back that there were problems they were seeing, and their warnings were ignored. Okay, and two of them I think were hostages that have been released recently, but they you it's just impossible for that to have happened with Israel uh, seriously falling asleep. That's my opinion that Netanyahu let it happen, and now he had the pretext to do what he always wanted to do, which is to capture Hamas, keep the oil and gas out of the hands of the Palestinians. And by the way, when you look at the end game, like I was reading Al Jazeera, and there was a commentary in Al Jazeera that you're not going to have any peace in that part of the world unless the Palestinians have rightful access to their own natural resources. Now, who's going to let that happen? It's not going to be Netanyahu. It's not going to be his right wing people. But the problem is under Biden, they were doing things behind the scenes as well, and one of them was it's called the India Middle East corridor. And what it is, it's going to be a pipeline that connects Haifa, Palestine, Israel, and it goes across the Saudi desert and under the sea and connects to India. And it can go both ways. All right. So they have big dreams for that. They're claiming that it's clean hydrogen energy, which makes it okay, and that's causing a lot of people to scoff. Um, but at any rate, that's part of the plan. And interestingly enough, Netanyahu, of course, fully endorses it because he wants the energy corridor. So I'm going to show you a picture of him with two maps. All right. You can if you Google Netanyahu and maps, you'll find this. And there one is the blessing. That's the blessing, and that's the black area is the curse. The curse is the axis of resistance, so called, and that's Syria, Iraq, and going over, well, eventually down to Yemen. Now, the blessing is a greatly expanded Israel. Plus, you see a red line here. Let's see if you can see it. Yeah, there. There's a red line that
Okay.
goes, and that I think that is the pipeline, and it connects to India, and it follows the same route as the Trans-Arabian pipeline, which my father worked on in terms of trying to figure out a safe terminal point way back in 1947. He was with the OSS, first of all, Office of Strategic Services, and then the Central Intelligence Group, CIG, immediate predecessor of the CIA. So his job was to try to determine the route of the Trans-Arabian pipeline. And what that meant is he had to make sure there were friends all around that were going to allow this to happen. When you build a pipeline, you're going to make sure the Indians don't come out and attack it. You know what I mean? This is just like conquering the West. You're going
Okay.
into hostile territory. You got to figure out how to make it peaceful. So there is an uninterrupted flow of oil. And what happened actually is that the Syrians in 1947 were rejecting the pipeline going through Syria if it was going to terminate in Palestine, which they knew was becoming a Jewish state, and they didn't want to support it. And the oil companies were furious and so on. And what happened is the president of Syria, his name was Kuwatli, he was overthrown by the CIA. The first CIA coup was not in 1953, which overthrew the nationalist government of Mossadegh. It was in 1949, and it overthrew Kuwatli, and they put in an army chief as the new president, and he said, okay, run the pipeline any way you want. So the reason I focus on pipelines is uh, is because they're central to the distribution of oil and natural gas. They have to be protected. And I found a note by a contemporary of my father who was working in Saudi Arabia, and he called the Trans-Arabian pipeline the artery of empire. And he said that's what it is, an empire. In other words, the building of the American empire was really enhanced when the United States got complete control over Saudi oil. Look at what's happening now. I mean, Saudi Arabia used to be a rather quiet partner. It just kept shipping the oil. Uh, and the pipeline terminated in Lebanon, which is what my father wanted because there was less conflict there. It terminated in Lebanon, and it was very helpful and certainly in supplying oil to Europe to help them recover from World War II. It was sort of integral to the Marshall Plan, and they also wanted to compete with coal unions that were run by communists in Europe. This always this competition between East and West, as the New York Times called it, way back in '47. They saw what was going to happen. So there's just this mad scramble. It's still going on.
So you watch the news and you read what's going on. Is there any journalist or TV reporter that understands what you're talking about?
I feel like I'm all alone, but there are a few exceptions. And one of them I found not through the TV, but I was on a show, speaking, and I saw this person's previous shows and discovered a woman who wrote a book. Get this, here's the title: A Good Spy Leaves No Trace. Subtitle: Big Oil, CI Secrets, and a Spy Daughter's Reckoning.
Wow.
There it is.
Wow.
And we've been in touch. So suddenly, two women are not so lonely in saying, this thing's all about oil, folks. Wake up and see it. And yeah, the CIA is involved. My father, working for the predecessors, we must control the oil at all costs. At
But
all
but
costs. What are the costs, my God? What are the
but what
costs
you
now?
but what you keep saying is all this oil, it's going to feed the war machine, correct?
Yes. Yeah, correct. And by the way, oh, there are some people that have caught on. Finally, finally. Here, I'll show you this. The United Methodists of all people. Bravo to them. Where is it? I'm trying to find the picture. Yeah. All right, boycott Chevron. See that? So
Wow.
they're on. They're onto it. Chevron is profiting from the genocide in Gaza. And yes, indeed. And guess what? Guess who got control over most of the oil off the coast of Israel? Chevron. Who's Chevron? Chevron is the former Standard Oil of California that got the exclusive American concession of the oil in Saudi Arabia. So Chevron is up there as a major, major player in this part of the world. And of course, behind them is, and I assume is still is, was the Rockefellers, who were the premier power, oil power in the world in the 20th century. Henry Kissinger once said, Henry Kissinger was a protege of Nelson Rockefeller.
Right.
Most people don't know that, but that's what he was. And what he said, when you control the oil, you control the world. Now, it's more complicated because more players are trying to control the oil. So now we just have these constant, you know, clashes. Ukraine is just a classical example. And look at what's happening. The people who are meeting to work out peace are the Russians and the Americans. You know, the Ukrainians weren't invited at this point. And to my interpretation of that is what I've always said. I've always thought the war in Ukraine was a proxy war. The poor Ukrainians are caught in the middle. But these are also their wars over resources, which never gets mentioned. You know, Ukraine has the second largest reserves of oil and natural gas in Europe, next to Russia. Russia has the most, but Ukraine, and most of it is in the Donbass region on the east, and you can see that's where most of the fighting is. And isn't it interesting that Trump said outright, "Yeah, we'll make peace. Ukraine's got to allow us to have 50% of all the royalties for exploitation of rare metals and lithium, lots of
Right.
lithium
Right.
there. But they don't talk about the oil or the gas. Like Burisma, what's Burisma? That energy company that involved Hunter Biden, but it also involved Trump. It was the largest energy company in Ukraine, and it was Biden who was President Biden who encouraged the exploitation of that region. So who's going to get it? My guess is that Russia will get a good chunk of it, and maybe Ukraine will be left alone. I don't know, but it just shows you who really calls the shots. It's big oil that's causing the shots, and these major powers, the Americans and the Russians. So what's going to happen to the Gazans? What's going to happen in the West Bank? Um, I think the Trump administration um, is doing everything it can to confuse people and grab before they're stopped. And the result is, of course, tragedy. terrible tragedy, and ongoing hatred.
When you say that they grab until they're stopped, who's going to stop them?
Well, that's the question. Who is going to stop them? Who's going to stop them? It, I mean, and Europe now is meeting separately. They're so disturbed about what's going on. You see, here's part of the analysis that I have developed over years. My previous book with my husband Jerry Colby was about Nelson Rockefeller and how he wanted to exploit the oil and the riches of the Amazon. It was his shining dream. We found this out going to archives, and we went to the FDR archives, and we found out that one of his people to achieve his dreams as an assistant secretary of state. His name was Adolph Burley, assistant secretary of state for Latin America, and former ambassador to Brazil. And Burley uh, opened the door for us to find out what they were really about. And what it was to build a huge empire in Latin America and develop the Amazon. So I learned about how oil operates, and I learned a lot about the Rockefellers as well. And the thing about them is they've had an entire century to learn from their mistakes, right? And one of the things that they learned is you don't go in with a sledgehammer, which is what Trump and his people are doing. Yeah, it's more delicate than that, and it's preferable you don't get your military involved. It's preferable if you can control countries through economics, and sanctions is one of them. But at any rate, the way I see it is, um, the Trump's aim is just based on his own experience, and of course, learning from his mentor Cohen, that you go in there and you make sure you never admit that you're wrong, and I forget the three pieces of advice, but you become a great big bully, and that's what Trump is doing. So anyway,
So so this story will definitely continue, correct?
yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is it's going to continue. The big worry, of course, is nuclear. You know, Saudi Arabia wants nuclear power. They all say, "Oh, we're just going to develop it for, to provide energy to our people." But give me a break. Yeah, Saudi Arabia probably wants nukes. Um, I mean, why should Iran have nukes? They're trying to prevent Iran from having nukes, but because Saudi Arabia is our friend, the United States is willing to start doing business with them. And of course, Israel. Do you ever hear that it's a heavily armed nuclear power? Never. But that's what makes everything in the Middle East so sensitive. And that's why there's problems now. By going in with a sledgehammer, I think it's going to backfire. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, they could use an oil embargo. The Arab countries once did that in '73. So that was when the October War happened. So they could
Right.
do that. I could see that happening. I don't
So
know what.
So what you're saying will continue. So what I want to I want to offer an invitation as this whole drama unfolds for you to come back on issues that matter and talk about what's going on that the average person does not hear from the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm doing now, and I'm happy to do it again. I appreciate your giving me the opportunity, Cynthia, because I once told my husband I was a reporter over there in the '70s in Lebanon, and I had come to learn that oil was king. Okay, and when I came to the United States, and I met him, I said the Middle East is the most censored part of the world, and it still is, all because of oil. You must
Sense,
control it at all costs.
really, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, as this develops, Charlotte, I'd love to have you back on.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you, Cynthia.
So, you've been listening to Charlotte Dennett. Hold up your book again. Follow the,
Follow the pipelines, uncovering the mystery of a lost spy. That was my father, and the deadly politics of the great game for oil. It's
and
all there, and there are maps, 10 maps that explain all these wars by
and
these arteries of empire.
I'm Cynthia Pooler, and this is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Charlotte, we'll talk again. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.